Coming up to 8:45, the author Patrick Gale already has such titles as Notes from an Exhibition under his belt, but his 19th book, A Place Called Winter, is very different from its predecessors.
It's been described as the Edwardian version of Brokeback Mountain, and it's loosely based on the author's own great-grandfather, who abandoned his privileged Edwardian life and his family to become a pioneer farmer in Canada. And Patrick Gale is here with us now. Very good morning to you.
Hello,
I hope we're not going to give too much away to people, because there's quite a lot of spoilers.
A lot of spoilers in this book.
So we won't do that. But just tell us a little bit about the background and about this character, Harry, who you're talking about.
Well, Harry Kane, not a footballer, was a gentleman of leisure in London. He inherited a big fortune because his dad ran one of the first bus companies. And he and his brother married into a huge family with 12 children. And all went well at first. He had a little girl, my granny. And then, for some reason, he abandoned wife and child and went out to Canada to be a homesteader, which was a big opportunity then, but a strange thing to do to your family. And he survived out there, didn't come back until 1953, and he came back very briefly. So those are the facts.
Right.
Well, what I've done is to make up a story that answers my question: why did he go and how did he survive?
And what possible explanation could there be?
Well, my granny left behind a little memoir, which I found, an unpublished, inked memoir. And in that, she gives 2 or 3 reasons, and they sort of contradict each other. So she says she thought maybe he lost his money. That clearly wasn't true. She says he was a bit of a reprobate. Now, that might have been true. So what I've done is to imagine that just perhaps he was gay. Because I'm gay, and there's a genetic inheritance, and it must have come from somewhere. And if that had been the case, she would never have known. Probably none of the women in the family would have known. It was the kind of thing that would have been hushed up. And going to Canada would have been a very useful solution, really. You go off and just disappear.
And reprobate would be a term which in those days would cover a multitude of what they considered to be sins.
And poor Granny was raised by this army of aunts, because her mother died not long after Harry left. And there was no question of her being sent out to join him in Canada. She was raised by these aunts who clearly ever so slightly disapproved of him. So there was this edge of disapproval. And that is also picked up by my grandmother in the 1950s, when her long-lost father came back, toothless, penniless, but alive, clearly hoping she would take him in. And actually, she was very ambivalent about it and clearly couldn't wait to get him back to Canada. She didn't take him in.
Oh, gosh.
So
and
again,
is that what happened to him? He went
in
back,
real
did
life,
he?
yes, it was one of those elements of the story that was so sad, I couldn't bear to put it in the book in the end. The book was sad enough without that. It is a 3-hanky job.
You don't write him as a reprobate, at least at the beginning of the story, do you?
I hope not, no. I mean, he's not a faithful husband, but he's a loving husband. And in a way, this is as much the story of the women in his life as it is of him discovering who he is. So it's a story celebrating the friendship between men and women. So first of all, we have the friendship with his wife, Winifred. And then when he goes out to Canada, there are a succession of ever stronger women who influence his life and teach him to stand on his own 2 feet.
It's also a reminder of the desperate straits you could get into if you were gay at the time.
Oh, it was incredibly dangerous. I mean, it wasn't that long after the Oscar Wilde trials. There was tremendous paranoia. I had enormous fun reading up on this and digging into people's diaries and letters and unpublished material to see just how nervous people were. And interestingly enough, having thought I was making it all up, I've then spoken to historians in Toronto and Vancouver who are saying they are uncovering stories just like the one I've made up, showing that middle-class families would use Canada at this period as a handy place to send the black sheep of the family if they wanted to hush up a scandal or stop somebody getting caught by the police.
Right.
Ironically, they would send them to Canada to make a man of them. Canada at this point in the middle had almost no women at all, so they were ironically sending them to gay heaven.
Right, and you've seen pictures during your research of what adverts for inviting women to Canada.
Yes, I mean, there was a desperate shortage of women. At the period Harry went out before the First World War, some of these tiny communities had about 1 woman to every 40 men, and the chances are that woman was already married. So they did these wildly misleading posters showing Canada as a golden place full of wheat that grew itself. But they also rather charmingly threw things called bachelor's balls, where the men would be photographed dancing with other men out of desperation. And they hoped that women back home would think, oh, poor things, we must move there to look after them.
If they gave you free land if you went out there?
You had 160 acres. You had what they called a quarter section, and you had to bring it into cultivation within 3 years and be living on it.
But it was very, very tough.
very tough. I mean, the winters there are -35 routinely. And for Harry, especially, this was a man who had never worked in his life, never worked with his hands. He wasn't even a gardener. And the thing I hope I've really brought home in the book, quite apart from the made-up story, is just the courage and strength it must have taken to have endured like that. A bit like Kevin Carr, who was on earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a man who had to learn the hard way, and he put himself through many years of hard labour, basically.
And you went out to Canada to do the research as well.
I
Was
did.
that, you wanted to do that, did you?
I really wanted to see where he had farmed, and it was terribly moving because I had the map coordinates. I could find exactly where his quarter section was, and to find that it was still under cultivation was wonderful. So all his labour wasn't wasted. The little town of Winter is now a ghost town, but the farms are still there.
Yes, what a name for a town, Winter too. Here you are, you sort of planted a fictional story on a real-life character. How did that settle with the rest of the family?
Well, luckily, the only two members of the family who met Harry in the 1950s, my mother and my aunt, are quite forgiving. And my mum does have dementia these days, bless her. So I don't think she's quite realised just how scandalous the story is.
Right.
But I hope other members of the family will feel that actually what I've done is to dust down a bit of the family story that hadn't really been looked at before. Yeah. And although, as I say, I've made up the story about Harry's love life, I think I've turned him into a bit of a hero while I was at it.
And
so.
Your publisher made it into a sadder ending, or am I giving too much away?
Well, no, actually, the ending I'd made was pretty sad, but they got me to take away some of the sugar. I love happy endings, and there is a happy ending after all the sadness, but
Okay.
I had to make it a bit sterner than it was in the first draft.
I like the sugar version.
Sounds very intriguing. Patrick, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Patrick's book is called A Place Called Winter.
Carol's here with the weather, or she's on the roof rather.